Palestinian territories and the suffering endured by the Palestinian people as a result of the Israeli occupation. The Hamas resistance movement has announced that indirect negotiations on extending the Gaza truce with the Israeli occupation authorities in force since January 19 have begun in Doha. Ukraine has agreed to accept a U.S. proposed immediate 30-day ceasefire in its current war against Russia, pending Moscow's acceptance of the same terms. Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Slimani. The President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has said that the construction of the recent seawater desalination plants in record time laid the foundations for an Algerian school for the implementation of major projects. Speaking at the inauguration of the Kabjanet 2 seawater desalination plant in the province of Boumerdès, President Tebboune expressed his utmost pride with fulfilling a duty for which our valiant martyrs sacrificed themselves during the revolution, thus making their dreams come true, particularly in the month of March, the month of martyrs, during which most of the leaders of the glorious liberation revolution fell as martyrs.
وهذا شهر الشهداء يعني نجسد أحلامهم الشهر الذي استشهد فيه أغلب القادة نتاع الثورة لازم الارتباط كذلك نتاع الأحداث هذه وهالإنجازات بما جاء به السلف الصالح بالثورة والتحرير ومواجهة أقوى جيوش آنذاك. الحمد لله اليوم لا يسعنا إلا أن نفتخر ونتباهى بما فعله سواعد بناتنا وابنائنا في هذا البلد الكريم.
The President of the Republic also hailed Algeria's children for their tremendous efforts in completing the desalination plants, including the technicians, managers and workers, underlining that the completion of these projects in a record time of 26 months is the dream of every Algerian.
أعتقد أن حلم كل جزائري كان أننا نصل في ظرف وجيز 26 شهر بما فيها التهيئة خارجية تاع المشروع، وشاكرهم وقد ما نشكرهم قد ما ربما ما نأديش بالشكر الكافي، لأن الكلمات والشعور ما يكفوش لإبراز كل ما قام به بناتنا وأبنائنا وإطارات جزائرية.
President Tebboune emphasized that the construction of desalination plants in our country has laid the foundations for an Algerian school of the implementation of mega projects, which will enable Algeria to join the sphere of emerging and developed countries.
تكون درس بالتقريب يعني حتى الناس اللي ينطلقوا في مشاريع كبرى ضخمة أخرى إن شاء الله، لأن هذه هي المسيرة تاعنا اللي تسطرت من أول وهلة على أساس تدارك العجز في كل الميادين والوصول إلى ركب دول ناشئة دول متقدمة، ورانا في الطريق الصحيح. فشاكر لكل وزارتين بما فيها وزارة الري ووزارة الطاقة. أعتقد أن انطلاقا من هذه المشاريع راهم هما أسوا مش احنا أسوا لمدرسة جزائرية في إنجاز مشاريعكم إن شاء الله.
The head of state stressed that no words can describe the pride and joy as to the high level the Algerians have reached, insisting that the strategic projects implemented in Algeria are a model to follow in the implementation of major projects.
C'est très difficile d'exprimer ce qu'on ressent réellement. Bon, la fierté à un niveau jamais égalé. Voilà. Le savoir-faire des Algériens, actuellement, pour arriver à ce niveau, il y a un savoir-faire, il y a un patriotisme à toute épreuve. Travailler 3 fois en équipe sur 3 fois 8, c'est pas facile à faire. في ظروف في الشتاء وفي ظروف صعبة وفي كذا. رغم انشأتوا مدرسة تقنية وطنية عصرية اللي بغى يتبع. هذه هي الطريق اللي اختارته الجزائر، وإن شاء الله يتبعوها مشاريع أخرى وقطاعات أخرى إن شاء الله تدريش فيها.
To conclude, the President of the Republic recalled that the construction of seawater desalination plants was intended to alleviate the consequences of the scarcity of rainfall and to preserve the groundwater table, underlining that the province of Boumerdès, which was lagging behind during the period of national tragedy in the 1990s, is now beginning to benefit from various development projects. President Abdelmajid Tebboune inaugurated in the province of Boumerdès the Cap Jeannat 2 seawater desalination plant, which has a production capacity of 300,000 cubic meters a day. The details in this report by Said Bougazi.
Yesterday's inauguration ceremony for this major strategic infrastructure was attended by the Minister Delegate to the Minister of National Defense, Chief of Staff of the National People's Army, AMP, Army General Saeed Shengriha, the Minister of State, Minister of Energy, Mines and Renewable Energies, Mohamed Arkab, the Minister of Interior, Local Assemblies and Country Planning, Brahim Murad, the Minister of Hydraulics, Taha Derbel, as well as the heads of the national companies in charge of the construction and the local authorities. On this occasion, the President of the Republic received a detailed briefing on the progress of the work and the stages involved in building this vital infrastructure, which covers an area of 18 hectares and provides drinking water to the inhabitants of the province of Boumerdès and several neighboring provinces. This major project is part of the national program decided by the President of the Republic to build 5 major seawater desalination plants in the provinces of Tarf, Koudit Drawush, Bijaya Tiram Tuja, Boumerdès Cap Jeannat, Tipaza Fouka, and Oran Cap Blanc, each with a production capacity of 300,000 cubic meters a day at a cost of around $2.4 billion. These large-scale projects completed in a record time, thanks to national expertise and cutting-edge technology, are designed to improve water safety and meet the drinking water needs of the citizens. They reflect the qualitative leap Algeria has made in strengthening its water security.
As you followed in our top stories, Algeria has expressed in New York, through its permanent representative to the United Nations, Ammar Ben Jama, its deep concern about the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories and the ongoing suffering endured by the Palestinian people as a result of the Israeli occupation. The details with Amina Boudisha.
In his address to the UN Security Council's annual briefing on cooperation between the United Nations and the European Union under the agenda item cooperation between the UN and regional and sub-regional organizations in maintaining international peace and security, Ammar Ben Jama underlined that Algeria is deeply concerned with the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories.
Algeria remains deeply concerned about the ongoing situation in the occupied Palestinian territories and the endless suffering of Palestinian civilians. We commend the EU's effort to alleviate this suffering, and we commend its unwavering commitment toward a lasting and just settlement of the Palestinian question in line with the internationally agreed parameters. I mean, within the framework of the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution.
Mr. Ben Jama said that today's meeting is taking place at a time when the world is facing multifaceted and interconnected crises requiring a coordinated and multilateral response, underlining that the level of the complexity of these challenges highlights the need for enhanced cooperation between the United Nations and regional organizations, as provided for its Chapter 8 of the United Nations Charter. Referring to cooperation between the African Union and the European Union, Ammar Ben Jama said that it remains the cornerstone of our joint effort to tackle crises and build lasting peace.
Algeria, as an African nation deeply committed to the principles of multilateralism, recognize the vital role of the European Union in promoting peace and security. The long-standing cooperation between the African Union and the European Union remains a cornerstone of our shared efforts to address conflicts and build sustainable peace. We welcome the continued support of the EU to the African Union-led peace support operations, and we urge the EU to maintain its endeavor for these critical initiatives for addressing security challenges in Africa.
With regard to the Ukrainian crisis, Ammar Ben Jama stressed the importance of giving priority to the diplomatic channel and of creating conditions conducive to an inclusive and constructive dialogue between the parties with a view to reaching a negotiated solution to the conflict based on the objectives and principles of the United Nations charter and responding to the legitimate security concerns of all parties.
Meanwhile, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, has called for the removal of obstacles to humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip imposed by the Zionist occupation on the Palestinian enclave.
Today we discussed the situation in the Middle East. In Syria, the path to stability remains fraught, as the recent shocking violence has underscored. I call on all sides to seek peaceful solutions and to overcome the spiral of violence. The EU supports an inclusive transition and economic recovery. And next week, the European Union will host a donors conference aimed at generating much-needed financial support for Syria's reconstruction. In Gaza, the ceasefire is under strain. It is critical that both sides uphold their commitments and that Phase 2 talks succeed. Humanitarian aid and services should not be politicized. The EU welcomes the Arab Recovery Plan, and we look forward to discussing it further with our partners. As the region moves on to rebuild, the two-state solution remains the only path to sustainable peace.
The European leader also denounced the attacks on international law across the world, rejecting attempts to replace it with the rule of force, stating that this year marks 80 years since the creation of the United Nations, which is under unprecedented pressure. The Hamas resistance movement has announced that indirect negotiations on extending the Gaza's truce with the Israeli occupation in force since January 19 have begun in Doha. Senior Hamas official Abdel Rahman Shahid expressed hope for progress toward the second phase, emphasizing U.S. responsibility for its unwavering support for the Israeli occupation. Mohammed Khatil has more details in this report.
The representative of Hamas in Algeria, Youssef Hamdan, stated that the Doha discussions aim to gauge the movement's stance. He reaffirmed his party's commitment to the agreement signed by all the parties, including the U.S., emphasizing its openness to all available options, while accusing Netanyahu of obstructing the deal by avoiding second-phase negotiations and creating obstacles.
There were dialogues intended to gauge the stance of the movement, and in these discussions we reaffirmed our position of adhering to this agreement signed by all parties, including the U.S. administration. We emphasized that we are open to all options that align with the commitment to this agreement. We affirmed that we have sufficient flexibility to handle any requirements that may arise at different stages, based on the principles that we have an agreement that must be implemented. The one obstructing this agreement is Netanyahu, who avoided entering negotiations for the second phase on the 16th day of the first phase and continued to create obstacles.
Mediators are now working to resolve disputes over the second phase. Hamas demands a permanent ceasefire, a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and the release of remaining hostages, while the occupation authorities insist on extending the first phase truce until mid-April, the total demilitarization of Gaza and Hamas's eradication. The truce, brokered by the US, Qatar and Egypt, halted 15 months of genocidal war waged by the Israeli occupation against the Palestinians.
The head of the media office in Gaza, Salama Maruf, has said that attacks by the Zionist occupation army in the Palestinian enclave have resulted in no fewer than 137 deaths since the ceasefire agreement came into force last January. Saeed Bougazi has more.
The Zionist occupier has deliberately stepped up the pace of its crimes and ceasefire violations in the Palestinian enclave over the past 10 days, said Salama Maruf in a statement, noting that the latest attack by the occupying forces in the Gaza Strip resulted in the deaths of 5 Palestinians, including 2 brothers, targeted by drones in the south of the Palestinian enclave. He said that this 18th massacre brought the number of martyrs since the ceasefire agreement came into force on 19 January to 137, including 52 in Rafah. He added that the Zionist occupier is also continuing to put pressure on the Palestinian people and to exacerbate their suffering by tightening the siege imposed on the Gaza Strip and denying them all basic necessities on the one hand, and by increasing its crimes on the ground by killing citizens in cold blood. The head of the media office in Gaza also pointed out that the Zionist entity is lying in the narrative it is spreading to justify the massacre of defenseless civilians, including children and women, none of whom represents a threat to its soldiers, and most of them having fallen as martyrs while inspecting their homes near the positions of the occupation forces.
Ukraine has agreed to accept a U.S. proposed immediate 30-day ceasefire pending Moscow's acceptance of the same terms, according to a joint statement by officials on Tuesday evening. More with Mohammed Khatil.
A joint U.S.-Ukrainian statement released after the end of the talks in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, indicated that Ukraine expressed readiness to accept the U.S. proposal to enact an immediate interim 30-day ceasefire, which can be extended by mutual agreement of the parties and which is subject to acceptance and concurrent implementation by the Russian Federation. Both delegations agreed to name their negotiating teams and immediately begin negotiations toward an enduring peace that provides for Ukraine's long-term security. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who will now take the proposal to Moscow, told reporters that the ball is in the Russian court. The deal marks a significant change of tone between the U.S. and Ukraine, with both countries now signaling they are on the same side in the ongoing negotiations. The head of Ukrainian President's Office, Andriy Yermak, said after the talks that today we demonstrated to the world we want peace, a just and lasting peace, as he put it. President Volodymyr Zelensky, who did not participate in the Saudi Arabia talks on Tuesday evening, said in a statement that Washington understands Ukraine's arguments and accepts its proposals. Meanwhile, the Trump administration said Tuesday that it would immediately lift its suspension of military support to Ukraine and its intelligence sharing with Kiev. The 180-degree shift on the two issues came more than a week after imposing the measures to push Zelensky into negotiations that could lead to a peace deal with the Kremlin. Officials from the two countries met in Saudi Arabia to also discuss the possibility of reaching a deal on critical raw minerals, which, according to the post-meeting statement, is to be agreed on as soon as possible.
The High Commissioner for Human Rights, designated expert on human rights in Haiti, William O'Neill, has told journalists in New York that the risk of the capital, Port-au-Prince, falling under gang control is tangible.
Despite the efforts of the Haitian National Police and the multinational security support mission, the risk of the capital falling under gang control is palpable. These violent criminal groups continue to extend and consolidate their hold even beyond the capital. They kill, rape, terrorize, set fire to homes, orphanages, schools, hospitals, places of worship. They recruit children, and they infiltrate all spheres of society. All this with the utmost impunity and sometimes, as many sources point out, with the complicity of powerful actors.
The human rights expert said violence has internally displaced over 1 million people. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. Next is an interview with the Secretary of the Global Flagship of Food Security, Mr. Conor Raine, who speaks about the flagship's objectives and the current state of food security in the world, notably in the Middle East and Africa.
Hello and welcome to the waves of Radio Algeria International. Today we are honored to have with us Mr. Conrad Raine, the Secretary of the Global Flagship Initiative for Food Security, joining us from Germany. Mr. Raine is a key figure in tackling one of the most pressing issues of our time, food insecurity, a challenge that affects millions around the globe, particularly in conflict-ridden regions. Mr. Conrad Raine, welcome to Radio Algeria International.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you. So, Mr. Raine, let's start with an overview of the Global Flagship Initiative for Food Security. Tell us about it and about its objectives.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the Global Flagship Initiative for Food Security was launched on Agri-Food Systems Day at the UNCCT COP16 in Riyadh, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in early December. The flagship is part of the Riyadh Action Agenda, a follow-up mechanism of this groundbreaking COP. This 5-year initiative emerged from a partnership between ACFAN, the Arab Gulf Programme for Development, BADEA, the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, and the 2-year Innovation Commission for Climate Change, Food Security and Agriculture, chaired by Nobel laureate Professor Michael Kramer at the University of Chicago. In fact, it is the main outcome of that commission. The leadership of ACFAN, Executive Director Dr. Nasser Al-Qadani, and BADEA's President Dr. Sidi Uttar were really crucial to get where we are today with the flagship. And the flagship was developed in close collaboration with the Science Summit at the UN General Assembly and represents a unified global effort to combat food insecurity. Backed by early support from ACFAN, BADEA, and cross-sector partners, the flagship prioritizes cost-effective, scalable, science-driven solutions that enhance food security and rural economic development in vulnerable regions around the world, especially the Sahel. It also aligns with global efforts to scale up sustainable development financing through public-private partnerships, concessional finance, and de-risking mechanisms. The Crop Trust, an international organization in Bonn, is a member of the flagship and is hosting the Secretariat of the Global Flagship Initiative for Food Security as a global public good. In terms of key characteristics of the flagship, allow me to highlight 3 pillars.
Yeah, please do.
We are not excluding anyone, meaning we are uniting the world on SDG 2, food security. We are depoliticizing hunger. When you look at the existing global membership in the flagship, we have the Gulf countries, China, India, Europe, the US, Latin America, all engaged in this initiative. And more governments, research institutes, and companies from around the world are joining. The flagship is transforming into a global movement. Also, it was an explicit request of the Arab Coordination Group, which backed the flagship in their communique from December 3rd last year, just before the launch of the flagship, to encourage a strong engagement of the private sector. And last but not least, the flagship is about impact. So the first 2 funded projects had already been announced during the launch in early December. We aim at having at least 2 funded projects per funding member per year.
So how would you describe the world's current state in terms of food security right now, the reasons that made you launch this initiative?
So hunger is on the rise, as we know, but the flagship is really taking an optimistic approach by doing things slightly differently, by bringing the world together, by bringing the private sector in, and by focusing on impact, identifying and promoting the scaling of evidence-based, cost-effective and scalable innovations that support the transformation towards diverse, resilient, sustainable and nutritious agri-food systems to help millions of people in some of the world's poorest and most vulnerable regions, in particular dry land.
So one of the topics that the flagship sheds light on, and I will quote, you mention that there should be a demand for bold and innovative financing solutions and transformative reforms. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, indeed. The flagship initiative will advocate for increased funding for science-driven interventions at the 4th United Nations Financing for Development Conference in Spain later this year. And this global platform will be instrumental in securing governmental, philanthropic and private sector support for food security, resilience and economic inclusivity.
So now, Mr. Ryan, let's shed light on one of the major regions affected by food insecurity, and with that I would name the Middle East and Africa, different African regions. So what solutions do you believe could be implemented to address food insecurity in these regions, and what role do not only the flagship but also other food aid organizations can play in supporting the affected communities?
Yeah, first of all, let me stress that the flagship does not exclude any region and is ready to work anywhere in the world, including, if not in particular, in neglected areas. Because initially, also, let's recall that this initiative started as an initiative focusing on the Sahel, but it quickly transformed into a global movement when various governments, research institutes, and companies from around the world joined. So the flagship recognizes that fighting hunger is not business as usual and that we need to get serious about tackling hunger, and that top-down approaches do not work. And the flagship is trying to be inclusive in many ways, including in terms of incorporating input from members from around the world, including the Global South, but also in terms of impact, with a particular focus on targeting young people and women. So the flagship also encourages strong involvement of its diverse range of members. For example, the Islamic Development Bank is a member of the flagship initiative, and we are planning engagement at the 2025 Islamic Development Bank annual meetings taking place in Algeria. I'm very much looking forward to that, and towards the various other key engagements this year, including the already mentioned 4th UN Financing for Development Conference in Spain, the 2nd UN Food Systems Summit stock-taking moment in Ethiopia in July, the African Food Systems Forum in Senegal in September, the Science Summit at the United Nations General Assembly in New York in September, which is now becoming the annual milestone event of the flagship initiative, and of course a key engagement on World Food Day in Rome, Italy in October.
What are the main topics to be tackled during these events?
First of all, it will be raising awareness about the flagship initiative and increasing its membership, but also at the same time bringing together an increasing diverse range of actors that certainly needs to work together in order, to have a lasting, sustainable impact on the ground, meaning helping the people that need the help the most on the ground. So it's really about reaching out and about the world coming together on this critical issue of food security.
You said that the flagship aims to help especially the neglected areas. What are the neglected areas that the flagship wants to focus on?
Yeah, in terms of geographical focus, for example, one of the members is Somalia, and Somalia is also currently a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, and is very excited about this flagship initiative and is considering this initiative as a, let's say, a tool or mechanism, if you like, to really accelerate progress on SDG 2. So that's, for example, one area. Then also in December, for example, we already announced the funding for a first project, actually for 2 projects, but one of them was rainwater harvesting in Niger. So this is also very important to highlight, as well as other regions. So we are not excluding anyone.
So now, Mr. Wayne, what can you say about the upcoming project that the flagship wants to initiate maybe in the future, apart from financing?
Well, for the time being, we have quite an ambitious agenda already, and we are currently in the process of agreeing on a strategy for this 5-year flagship initiative with all members, and this will then be the basis, moving forward. And we will have a stakeholder meeting of all the members of the flagship here in Bonn, Germany, in May this year, when the idea is, to adopt this strategy as basis. For now, the key is, really to continue identifying cost-effective, evidence-based, scalable innovations, and to get the funding for these to have really an impact on the ground, but at the same time, to keep the momentum and to bring in additional members